Undine Eliza Anna Smith Moore was born on August 25, 1904 in Jarratt, Virginia. She was the youngest child of James William Smith and Hardy Turnbull Smith, both of whom were enslaved prior to the American Civil War. In her hometown, she experienced some of her earliest musical influences both at home and at the Morning Star Baptist Church, where the community sang and prayed. At age 7, she began taking piano lessons with Lillian Allen Darden. Darden later encouraged her to pursue her musical studies at Fisk University, an opportunity made possible by a scholarship from the Juilliard Graduate School. She graduated from Fisk cum laude and began teaching in the public schools of Goldsboro, North Carolina. In 1927, she joined the faculty of Virginia State University, where she would remain until her retirement in 1972. In 1929, Moore moved to New York to pursue a master's degree at Columbia University, where she additionally received a professional diploma in music. She also studied composition privately with Howard Murphy, chairman of the Department of Theory at the Manhattan School of Music. Her time in New York immersed her in the cultural movement and artistic exposure of the Harlem Renaissance, a period that proved especially vital to the composer's awareness and affirmation of her talents. Being completely aware of the limitations imposed upon her by her race, she once said, "One of the most evil effects of racism in my time was the limits it placed upon the aspirations of blacks, so that, though I have been making up and creating music all my life, in my childhood, or even in college, I would not have thought of calling myself a composer or aspiring to be one." Despite this, she received success in her lifetime, both as a composer and a teacher. She was later given the name Dean of Black Women Composers after cementing herself as one of the more renowned and accomplished Black music educators of her time.
In academic circles, the dean is the head of, your organization. So it's saying you are the most schooled or the most you're the most important. It's a title of honor. So they would use that particularly at those times. What she had done, she was nominated for a Pulitzer Prize for her piece, choral piece, Scenes from a Life of a Martyr. And it's not, it's a fictional account of Martin Luther King. It's not intended to be a completely biographical, but it does tell aspects of his life. And it is such a powerful piece. I had the opportunity to sing the soprano solo on it a couple of times. And her work with the Afro-American suite that she wrote for her spiritual suite, her spiritual choral works that she had many published in her lifetime, they were published. Her accomplishments as a professor at Virginia State, her work, she didn't have a large output of songs, but she did have a huge choral output, and she did have a large, and as I said, that large scale work garnering a Pulitzer nomination is quite rare. And so that's why I think she was elevated to that status, because that was the kind of recognition that African-American composers hoped for, and to actually get that. And again, a woman composer getting that recognition. I think that's among the significance of her work.
The first exposure I had with Undine Smith Moore was when she came to Bennett College for a short time, and just as a guest composer, conductor, and wrote a couple of choral pieces for the choir, and I happened to be a student there at the time. I would think my first real exposure to her was when I was looking through the collection of works by African-American women composers that Hildegard Press published several years ago, and they included some of her works.
Describing it as the proudest moment in her career, she co-founded the Black Music Center while she was a professor at the Virginia State College, and this education program focused on the contributions of Black people to the music of the United States and the world. She was a professor at Virginia State College for over 40 years, where she taught piano and music theory. We can get a sense of her value of education through the way she referred to herself as a teacher who composes rather than a composer who teaches.
An amazing thinker too, wonderful theory teacher, composition at Virginia State. She was the teacher of Camilla Williams, the opera singer. Camilla Williams was the first African-American to sing with a major company in the United States. I think I'm right. So this is before all the people were singing at the Met. Camilla Williams graduated from Virginia State. And so Undine Moore actually wrote 3 of her spiritual arrangements for this person who was having such a successful career. Camilla Williams was also known because she sang the national anthem at the March on Washington. She wasn't scheduled to. Marian Anderson was scheduled to sing the anthem, and Camilla Williams was scheduled to sing something else later in the program. And Marian Anderson gets stuck in traffic, so they called Camilla. They're calling her name, and so there's an iconic photograph of her running up the steps to get to the platform so she can sing. But also, she was a person that would go to her hometown of Danville, Virginia, when they had race riots, and she gave concerts to try to be a part of the movement that was going on, the racial movement that was going on in the country. So she was an important figure in American history. Again, another one of those names that, unless you know, she taught at Indiana University for a long time, but she was a product of Virginia State University, and does have one of those places in history.
Part of what I've learned through my own research is the importance of copyright and intellectual property. And that's sometimes been a really painful block in doing certain kinds of work. So, for example, there are songs by people like Undine Moore sitting in manuscript form in folders at the Center for Black Music Research, and you can play them in the building, but you can't write about them and cite or quote from them, you know, or perform them because of the complexities of permissions, right? So you see the incredible work that people like Louise Toppin have done in bringing this work into print, and, you know, Linda Ray Brown, all these heroes of musicology.
With Undine Moore, I'm trying to put an anthology together, because her songs, at least at this moment, although several of them are published, you have a few of them in the Anthology of Women Composers by Hildegard Press. You've got one in a new anthology, Anthology of Art Song by Margaret Simmons and Jeannie Wagner from Southern Illinois Press. So they're not in the same place. And then there are others. Her output for song, I'm working with her daughter to see how large it really is. I know I have about 15 total. And I'm trying to, her papers were given to Emory, and so I'm trying to work with her daughter, Mary Easter, to see if there are more that are in the archive that we can include. I hope so, because the writing is so extraordinary. But that's why I'd like to put it all together in one place so you don't have to find, oh, and then there are 2 others in Patterson's 1977 anthology. So right now her output is in 3 different places. And I'm just one of those people that I like to see and compare songs when they're all together, and to compare the writing style. So that's why I'm doing it.
The words are just so simple, deceptively simple, you know, like how I adore you, how I adore thee, that ends each refrain of the text. But they're so simple, but they're so urgent, and they're so dramatic and tumultuous. It captures this sense of how nothing on this earth can stop this love. I mean, oceans may fall, mountains may crumble, but this love will never stop. And I actually was researching why she wrote this. I'm like, was this about someone close to her? Was this about this? And I actually discovered that it was written for a friend of hers weddings. It was Leon Thompson, I believe, and Jewel Thompson's wedding in 1961.
written for Dr. Leon and Dr. Jewel Thompson's wedding. And Dr. Jewel Thompson was my choir director at the Abyssinian Baptist Church. When I looked at your question and you asked about the Sappho, and I was like, you know what? I bet you that had something to do with Dr. Jewel Thompson, because she, we did some of her Martin Luther King music, and she used texts that most people do not use for her writing. So I was like, you know, I thought about it. I was out walking today and I was like, I wonder if this was Dr. Thompson's choice of music, because she was, you know, I don't know about Dr. Leon Thompson, but I know Dr. Jewel was one of Miss Moore's students. And so that was written for their wedding. And I didn't know it until I sang the piece maybe about 15 years ago. And she was at the concert and she said, you know, that was written for my wedding. And I was like, oh, and then I went and looked at the music and right at the top it says it. And I was like, oh, wow.
And Leon Thompson was a conductor and a musical minister at the Abyssinian Church in New York City, the big famous Harlem one. And it's interesting that she would write this for a friend, but I was thinking about like the mood of the era. They got married in 1961, and everyone was kind of saying, "Oh, the 60s, like the civil rights movement was like just over." It was like right in the thick of it, when a lot of things were not certain, whether rights-wise, whether future-wise. It was a decade of quite a lot of tumult, and this starting off, I think is almost just like an ode to how their love can withstand anything, whether the fury and the attacks upon them by people that just didn't want them to even have a love like that. I don't know. It's a song about just enduring, a love that endures.
she explored a lot of different poets. And so she did these 3 pieces, which are to Baha'i prayers. And so she was a Baptist. Her church was across the street from mine, so I know she was a practicing Baptist. But she loved these words in this Baha'i prayer, and it's unusual to find something like that. And she said it for soprano, flute is one movement. The second movement is soprano, flute, cello, and then the third movement is soprano, 2 trumpets. It might just be the 2 trumpets, I think. So it's an unusual combinations with these prayers. But I think that they're so beautiful because it showed she had such a worldview, and that and she was so gentle to always talk about, you know, God being all encompassing. And she showed that in her writing, that she didn't have to pick a Christian or a theological poem that her church would recognize, but she had this worldview. Her spiritual setting of watch and pray is so powerful, this narrative of a mother and a child. And the child starts off by saying, "Mama, is Massa going to sell us tomorrow?" So it's very stark. And the mother says, "Yes, yes, yes." And then the child keeps asking that, and you know, saying, "Are we going down to Georgia?" Which Georgia was the most dreaded place that a child could have been sent, especially if you're talking about from into the deep South, was much more dreaded than farther up. And so at the end, there's this wail from the mother, and it's just so palpable. And again, this was written for Camilla Williams, so it's got such an operatic sweep up to that high C, that's pianissimo, and then kind of winds its way back down as she wails and sings, "Oh, watch and pray." That's all you can do is watch and pray. So she uses religion in different ways in her pieces.
Is Martha going to sell us tomorrow?
Her accolades include being presented the Humanitarian Award from Fisk University in 1973, the title of Music Laureate of the State of Virginia in 1975, an honorary doctorate from Indiana University in 1976, the Candace Award by the National Coalition of 100 Black Women, and the Virginia Governor's Award in the Arts in 1985. In 1981, her Scenes from the Life of a Martyr, a 16-part choral cantata drawn from the life of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., was premiered at Carnegie Hall and was subsequently nominated for a Pulitzer Prize. Having lived through the Jim Crow era, Moore's music and her advocacy to create more awareness for Black art was influenced by the Civil Rights Movement. She championed the inclusion of African American music in the syllabi of schools and universities, as is evident in music education curriculum throughout the United States. Though her death in 1989 brought her work to an end, the effects of her passion reverberate clearly in the educators and performers of today.
She talks about love. I Want to Die While You Love Me is one of the poems. I think it's Georgia Douglas. And so she uses contemporary poets and gives, but they're always with this huge, now that's an operatic suite. When she writes her songs, they're quite dramatic.
Piece that I do that I love so much that she does the same thing with is oh gosh, I Want to Die While You Love Me. And it's another the way that she opens it kind of like the same way. It's this rolled chord and then it's like I want to die while you love me, and then she flows into it, and it's the same. It's interesting that I say that. It's a lot of the same ebb and flow, because that's really what it is in Love Let the Wind Cry. You know, it's she paints her text, she gives you know, like this real declaration at the beginning, and then it softens, it pulls back a lot. And then at the end, she comes back in roaring, you know, in a certain kind of way. It's beautiful, her music.
The marriage of music to text, the way she uses it's just gorgeous. She likes to not give you an introduction on a couple of her songs. Like that one is one that it just starts, yeah, I want to die. And it's this grand gesture from the beginning. She likes to catch you off guard like that. I had the honor of premiering as the pianist a couple of her spirituals. And so it was wonderful to hear her work and with the singer and again, trying to play these accompaniments because she was a pianist. They were quite well done.
to